Welcome to the Lead with Courage podcast, brought to you by Luminate Leadership, where bold conversations spark real change. Here, we dive into the stories, insights and lessons from leaders who challenge the status quo, inspire action and lead with heart. If you're ready to grow, learn and lead with courage, you're in the right place.
Hi, I'm Chloe Kennick. Luminate Leadership acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land, which we record this podcast the Yagara and Terrible people. We pay respect to the elders past, present, and emerging.
Hey, could I ask you a little favor? If you're enjoying the Lead with Courage podcast, could you please go and hit subscribe now? It's a small way you can support the show, and it helps us bring you even more inspiring conversations. Thanks for listening and enjoy today's episode.
In this special bonus episode of Lead with Courage, Cherie is joined by Luminate Leadership's Head of Learning and Development, Mandy Dudson. Cherie and Mandy dive into one of Luminate Leadership's most popular workshops, Emotional Intelligence. Together, they unpack what EQ really means in practice beyond the buzzwords and explore why it's not just something that you have or don't have, but a set of skills every leader can develop. From self-awareness and self-regulation to empathy and social skills, this episode explores the layers that shape how we show up, react, and connect. You'll hear relatable stories, practical tools, and a fresh perspective on what lives beneath the surface of every interaction. We hope you enjoy this very special bonus episode.
Mandy, welcome to the Lead with Courage podcast. Welcome back to the conversation.
Oh, thank you for having me. My first episode of the year.
Brilliant, and an important conversation because we're going to talk today about one of our favorite workshops because it's one of our most important and favorite topics, which is emotional intelligence. Tell us, why do you reckon it's important? Give us your perspective on EQ, EI, emotional intelligence.
Yeah, emotional intelligence is something that you hear leaders talk about all the time. And I'm sure everyone's heard someone say, oh, they're not very emotional intelligent or they have high EQ. But what does that really mean? Like, how much do we really know and understand about emotional intelligence? And I think that's where our workshop is really helpful to not only understand the term emotional intelligence, but really dive deep into all the different layers that make up emotional intelligence.
Yes. And I love that you say about layers because isn't it around, if we look at the definition and what the constructs of emotional intelligence, there's 5 different dimensions. And so it really is layers like the self-awareness, the self-management or regulation, that motivation, which I guess some people call growth mindset, empathy, social skills, like those 5 different elements of emotional intelligence. And tell us, like from your perspective and your take, are these just things we either have or don't have, or is this something people can develop?
Emotional intelligence is absolutely a skill that we can develop. And all of those 5 dimensions are skills that we can build on. Empathy is a skill. Self-awareness is a skill. And one of my favorite topics to talk about in emotional intelligence is that self-regulation, because I'm sure every single person listening right now has had a moment in their life where they have had something trigger them, they react, and then after the fact they go, oh, wow, I think I overreacted in that moment. And you have this regret. And I think that's why I love that portion of the workshop so much, is because it educates people around both the nature and the nurture of what's going on inside that causes us to react in a way that we're not proud of later. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's the understanding as well. And I know we talk about this a little bit, is around the impact of our brain and how we are actually wired to be looking for those fears and those threats, and why an amygdala hijack, an emotional hijack will happen because we are scanning for fears. But how often this nature or nurture or this blueprint of our lives are actually giving us really unfounded fears that we act on or react on. Yeah, I love that too. I feel like, what are your tips? When we run these workshops, there's a few tips that I love. What do you recommend to people to delve deeper into the self-awareness? Because for some of us, I think it's fair to say people like, oh yeah, I'm aware of when that happens. But many maybe don't see it for themselves yet. So they might see it in others, how others might react or overreact in inverted commas. So what are some ways that people can practically and leaders can practically experience self-awareness for themselves?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think there's some real value in understanding. We like to refer to it as what lives in your iceberg. So the human iceberg, in a really quick definition for anyone who doesn't know what it is, an iceberg, you can only see 10% from the surface. So you never know how big that iceberg is below the surface. So when we translate that into a human iceberg, what lies above the surface is what everyone sees of us. So
Mm.
how our reactions, that time that you do overreact, people see that, but they don't know what's actually going on below the surface. They don't know what your past experiences have been, your childhood trauma, your upbringing, your cultural background, all of these things people don't see. And all of us carry around this iceberg with all of these lived experiences that then play a part in triggering us when something happens. So it might be you see a cute little puppy walking down the street and it makes you really happy inside and you want to pat it. And then for some people, they might see a cute little puppy walking down the street and they start running in the opposite direction because they've had a really bad experience or they've been attacked by a dog. So I think that the more awareness or the more work that we can do on really understanding, okay, what are my lived experiences? What have been my challenges? What's my belief system? What are my core values? The more you understand what's in your iceberg, the more you know what triggers you
Mm.
and what can cause you to overreact. Can you think of something that's a trigger for you or
Yeah, and I think, sometimes we call it triggers,
yeah.
sometimes we call it activated or whatever it may be,
Mm,
or that jolts us into something. Yeah, lots of them. I feel like if we think about the five senses and that those triggers or activations can come from any of the five
mm,
senses. So I think, like you say about the dog, for me, I would say over the years, there's been particular words people might
mm,
use or scenarios. I know for me personally, if I think about my iceberg and my own upbringing, I had two experiences. One I would say is really a fortunate experience, and the other is a really tricky experience, but actually both lead to the same value, which is around inclusion and belonging. And so I'll get really triggered or activated if people aren't being very inclusive. So if we're in a space where people aren't being considerate or empathic, I can really be activated or triggered by that. And I think from the positive experience, it was growing up and traveling. So our family traveled from the age of one for me, seeing different cultures and seeing how other people live. And that real sense of love and respect for all cultures was something that was embedded in me very, very early. So I saw that for why being inclusive is so important. And at the same time, when I was in year six, I was bullied really badly. And so at that time, I think it was the receiving end of not being included and not belonging. And that was a really tricky part of my life. So I think looking at it from positive and negative experiences, that shaped what is a core value in me now. And so when people are out of alignment with that value or I see that behavior, that's where I can get really triggered or activated. I can then either, and I think if we think about like the ego, or if we think around, above and below the line, I can get into an activated into a real righteousness, like where I look down on someone and I think, oh, they're not very good people, like a real place of judgment. They're not good people because they're not very inclusive. And I can be judgmental, which is not my preferred
mm.
state of being. Or I go into a place of I don't feel like I belong, and then I go into not enoughness. So, kind of either activated from an overinflated sense of ego or an underinflated ego. Either way, not a great place to be. But yeah, that for me is something that now I'm really aware of it. So if I
Yes.
see someone not being very inclusive or leaving people out, I'm just really aware to some strategies, I guess, for myself is take a few deep breaths and ask myself, I wonder what's going on for them
Yeah.
rather than turning into that judgment.
Yes, yes. Thank you for sharing that, Cherie. I think there's a really great message in your stories that you shared there as well of leaders. How often do we see our team react or respond? And then, for example, you might get really defensive if someone's not being inclusive. The leader might see defensiveness and go, "Oh, yes, Cherie's just so defensive." And what we start to do is we then start to create our own story of what's happening in their iceberg, which
Yes.
often is not the right story. And I think that that's where that emotional intelligence does come into play, when a leader can see someone react or act in a certain way and have the self-awareness or the emotional intelligence to go, hey, look, they've just something has stimulated their reaction right now,
Yeah.
and their reaction's not good. I need to be curious and I need to understand what's in their iceberg, rather than just deciding off my own accord what I think
Yeah.
they've got going on.
They're not a good team member.
Yeah.
They're below the line.
They've
all
checked
the
out.
judgment, all the judgment.
Yeah.
And this is where, 100%. When we look at EQ in the workshop, there's so many elements we could discuss here. When it goes into empathy, how do I then have empathy for someone? So yes, that self-awareness is the starting point and the key, isn't it? Because you're realizing what's going on for you, to manage that, and then to have the empathy for others as leaders, and to get curious, not furious.
Yes. Curious, not furious. Love it. Love it.
Man, so I could speak about this topic for days and years, and I'm being told we've got to keep this one short. So, I'd love to keep going. I genuinely
Not
would.
easy for us to keep it short.
No, it is not. There's my self-awareness kicking right in.
Good job.
So if we're to summarize a couple of key takeaways, we talked then about the iceberg, and I think it's a real opportunity for people to know we actually have a free online program that people can jump in. It is absolutely free on our website. We'll put in the links where you can go and do some of these exercises, because it is doing the work, isn't it? The inner work, the reflective work. So check it out. It's called Define and Align. And that will help people really get to understand what's in their iceberg.
Yes.
What's another tip or summary for our listeners that they can do to develop greater EQ for themselves and their teams?
Yeah, I often reflect on my own leadership, and when I have really felt like I have been self-aware, I'm self-regulating, I'm motivated, all of those dimensions coming into play. And it's when I am at my least stressed and I'm calm and I'm focused that I'm really able to stop myself in those moments and respond rather than react and go, oh, something's stimulating me, something's triggering. Can we take a part of
We get stimulated. It can create a lot of calm. That's in the outtake.
I think it's important for me to understand, so they've just said something, it's activated something in me. Hold on, what's going on here for me? Whereas when I'm stressed, I don't have that ability to stop myself and reflect. So I think that my key piece of, or my key tip, I suppose, is making sure that as leaders that you have your daily practices like breath work, meditation. I love tapping. Whatever your daily practices are that help you stay calm, stay focused, have clarity, so that when you are in those moments where you really need your self-awareness to kick in, you're not overwhelmed with stress.
Yes, absolutely. And ensuring that our emotional bank account is, in balance.
Yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you for having me today, Cherie. It was
Oh.
great to talk 10 minutes of emotional intelligence.
Thank you for joining us. And it's great to have you here. And we look forward to any feedback from any listeners. We'd love to know, what is your tip? What is your one thing you do to cultivate greater emotional intelligence? Because it is a skill that we can develop, and we are here for it at Luminate Leadership. The more emotionally intelligent leaders we have in the world, the better the world will be. We truly believe that. So we can't wait to hear what you do to cultivate your EQ. And that's a wrap on this episode of Lead with Courage. Thank you for joining us. At Luminate Leadership, we exist to inspire and grow the leaders of today to create a better tomorrow. We believe that the people are the number one asset in every organisation, and we're here to support you in developing yours. You can see all the work we do on luminateleadership.com.au or across all of our socials. If you found value in today's episode, we'd love for you to follow, rate, and share the podcast with others who are also passionate about leadership. And until next time, keep leading with courage.